When I was 15, I got my first girlfriend. Her name was Casey, and she lived just a couple of blocks away from me in a really quiet, upper-class neighborhood. Since she was so close, I'd usually walk over to her house at night whenever I had nothing better to do. One Thursday during a school break, I decided to head over to her place. It was getting pretty late, but my parents weren't strict about curfews, so I wasn't worried about the time. A few minutes into the walk, though, I started noticing strange sounds around me, mostly from somewhere behind me. The first thing I heard was a bush rustling. I glanced back for a second, but didn't stop walking. I just picked up my pace a little. By the time I reached the next block, I heard another noise. This time, it sounded like a small branch snapping. I stopped and looked behind me. The street was completely empty. On both sides of the road were long rows of bushes separating the sidewalks from people's yards. It was basically a wall of greenery, but I couldn't see anyone hiding there or anything that could explain the noises. At that point, I started walking even faster. I was getting close to Casey's house, so I figured I'd be there in a minute anyway. Then I heard another sound. This time, it sounded a lot more like footsteps. Fast, light footsteps. I turned around again while still moving. Nothing. Nobody. I could already see Casey's house up ahead. Feeling uneasy, I called her. She answered immediately, and I told her I was getting seriously creeped out because I kept hearing weird noises behind me. I walked past the bushes around her driveway and stepped onto her property. Looking up, I saw Casey standing at her bedroom window on the second floor. She smiled and waved while laughing at me over the phone, and I waved back. Then her voice suddenly changed.
"Who's that guy standing right behind you?"
I spun around and saw a grown man crouched down only about 10 feet behind me. I completely lost it. I screamed and sprinted toward the front door, pounding on it as hard as I could. The man caught up to me and grabbed me, trying to pull me into some kind of headlock. For whatever reason, he suddenly let go and took off running. A second later, Casey's mom yanked the door open. The look on her face told me she had seen enough to know something was seriously wrong. She pulled me inside and slammed the door shut behind me while Casey ran downstairs. I could barely catch my breath. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. Casey's mom wrapped her arms around me, asked what happened, and then called the police to report a dangerous man wandering around the neighborhood. Needless to say, she let me stay at their house that night. The next day, she drove me home herself. One night, there was a really intense storm outside. Everyone in my family was doing their own thing. I was in my room watching TV. My parents were downstairs in the living room watching a comedy, and my sister was upstairs playing video games. Normally, I loved nights like that. The sound of heavy rain always helped me relax. That peaceful feeling disappeared instantly when there was a massive bang against my bedroom window. I jumped out of my bed and looked outside. There was somebody standing right outside my window. The rain was coming down so hard that it distorted everything, making it impossible to clearly see the person's face. Then he started slamming his hands against the glass. It sounded like he was yelling for help. I cracked the window open slightly and the man shouted, "Let me in! I'm hurt!" The rain was so loud that I had to yell back. I told him to go around to the front door, then I shut the window. I immediately ran into the living room and told my dad that there was a man outside who seemed injured and was begging for help. A few seconds later, we heard loud banging coming from the front door, along with more desperate shouting. My dad started walking toward the door and reached for the handle, but I stopped him. I said, "Wait." Something about the whole situation felt off, and I wasn't convinced opening the door was a good idea. Right then, the phone rang. The caller ID on the TV showed it was our next-door neighbor. My dad rushed over and answered it. A moment later, I heard him say, "No fucking way." The second he said that, I knew something was seriously wrong. He hung up and immediately told all of us to stay away from the front door. He didn't explain anything at first. Instead, he carefully walked to the window and peeked outside. What he saw made everything clear. The man was crouched on our front step, still pounding on the door, and he was holding some kind of large, sharp object in his hand. My dad shouted through the door, warning him to leave before the police arrived. Then he called the cops himself. Eventually, the banging stopped. When we checked again, the man was gone. Later, my dad explained what our neighbor had told him on the phone. Apparently, he had seen a rough-looking man sneaking around his backyard. The guy had been searching through his shed and eventually came out carrying a large chopping axe. Not long afterward, the police found the man wandering through nearby streets and took him into custody. A few days later, the whole incident ended up making the local newspaper. I used to live in a small college town, and my apartment complex was only a short walk from the downtown bar area. One weeknight, I stepped outside onto the front porch to smoke a couple of cigarettes while taking a break from studying. I brought one of my textbooks with me and stretched out on the stairs while I read. Around that time, a girl who lived in a nearby apartment came home from downtown. I didn't really know her, but I had seen her around before. She was alone, and it was pretty obvious she'd had a few drinks based on the way she was walking. She made it inside her apartment and had barely shut the door when a guy suddenly appeared and knocked on it. She opened the door, and I watched as he introduced himself. That immediately struck me as strange. It was around 2:30 in the morning. Who randomly shows up at a woman's apartment at that hour just to introduce themselves? Something felt off, so I decided to stay outside and keep an eye on the situation. The conversation kept going for more than 10 minutes. Later on, the girl admitted that she thought the whole thing was weird too, but she didn't know how to politely end the interaction. The guy's behavior only made it worse. A few different times, he reached out and ran his hand through her hair. He also kept slowly moving closer and closer to both her and the apartment door, almost like he was trying to work his way inside. At that point, I made sure to be as noticeable as possible. I started making noise with my textbook and moving around so he would realize somebody was watching. The moment he became aware of me, he left, and honestly, he vanished almost as suddenly as he'd shown up. Afterward, we contacted the police. A few days later, both the girl and I met with a sketch artist and helped put together a drawing of the man. Once the sketch was released to the public, tips started pouring in. It turned out the guy wasn't just some random creep. He was a serial rapist. According to investigators, he would follow women who were leaving bars alone and approach them while pretending to be a cab driver, offering them a ride home. The girl in our apartment complex only avoided becoming one of his victims because she lived so close to the bars. She walked home before he had a chance to pull his usual act. Thinking back on it now, she got incredibly lucky. I only remember parts of this story because I was really young at the time, probably around 7 years old. In our old house, my bedroom was on its own floor, completely separated from everyone else's rooms. It wasn't even designed to be a bedroom originally. It was more like a small room attached to the attic. The family who lived there before us had used it as a playroom for their daughters. The creepiest part of the room was the closet. It wasn't a normal closet at all. It sat several feet above the floor, and you had to climb a short set of wooden steps to reach it. There was a large sliding door, and inside was a huge storage space packed with old toys, boxes, and random junk from my childhood. Being a little kid, I hated sleeping up there by myself. The room already felt isolated from the rest of the house, and having that giant attic closet right inside my room didn't help. One night, after watching a scary movie with my family, I was lying awake in bed, feeling nervous. Then, I heard something move inside the closet. A toy had fallen over. The sound startled me so badly that I jumped out of bed and ran straight to my parents' room. They told me there was nobody in the closet. Seeing how scared I was, they let me sleep in their room that night. The following evening, I had mostly forgotten about it. That was until I heard another noise. This time, it sounded like a container full of Legos crashing onto the floor and scattering everywhere inside the closet. I immediately ran back to my parents' room and told them what I heard. My dad was starting to lose patience with me, but after some convincing, he let me sleep in their room again. The next day, my mom and I went to check the closet. Sure enough, there was a pile of Legos spread all over the floor. To me, that was proof that somebody had been in there. My mom disagreed. She said the container probably tipped over on its own and that there was nothing to worry about. That night, my dad had enough. Before going to bed, he locked his bedroom door and told me he was done with my constant scares. So I stayed in my room. I couldn't sleep. I just lay there in silence, staring into the darkness while my imagination ran wild, waiting for another sound to come from the closet. After what felt like forever, probably about an hour, it happened. The silence was shattered by the sound of the closet door suddenly sliding open. I froze. Moonlight poured through my bedroom window, lighting up the area near the closet. Standing there was a figure. The second I saw it, I let out the loudest, most terrified scream of my life. A wave of pure fear hit me so hard that I can still remember exactly how it felt all these years later. The figure immediately jumped down from the closet. Then it bolted across my room, raced through the house, and ran straight out the front door. My mom came rushing upstairs in panic while my dad charged downstairs, trying to catch whoever had been hiding in my room. But he was too late. The person was already gone. The police were called, but despite the investigation, they never found the man. When I was in 8th grade, I went on a school trip called the Louisiana Tour. The whole trip was basically a visit to different historic and well-known places throughout South Louisiana. One of the stops was the Myrtles Plantation, a place that's often described as one of the most haunted locations in the country. There are tons of ghost stories connected to that place, but one experience from that visit has always stuck with me. At one point, our group was gathered inside one of the rooms while the tour guide was explaining something. I honestly don't remember what the topic was because my attention ended up somewhere else. As I stood there listening, I started hearing what sounded like a single piano key being pressed. At first, I ignored it. Then, I heard it again. After the third or fourth time, I started looking around the room, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. The strange thing was that I couldn't even see a piano anywhere nearby. I leaned over to a couple of my friends and asked if they could hear it too. They looked at me like I was crazy and said they hadn't heard anything. A few moments later, the sound happened again. There it is again. My friend still had no idea what I was talking about, so I started scanning the room. Almost everyone was focused on the tour guide, but I noticed one woman looking directly at me. She pointed at me, then touched her ear and gave me a questioning look. It took me a second to realize what she meant. She was asking if I could hear it too. I nodded. At that exact moment, the tour guide began telling a story about a soldier who had supposedly died at the plantation. According to the story, he used to play the piano, and over the years, multiple guests had reported hearing piano music during the night, even when nobody was there. Hearing that gave me chills. I didn't really know what to make of it then, and honestly, I still don't know what to think about it now. As the tour moved on and everyone started leaving the room, I caught up with the woman. She told me she had been hearing the exact same piano notes the entire time. What made it even stranger was that her husband and her son, who had been standing right next to her, hadn't heard a thing. This story happened to a friend of mine. She told me about it around a year ago, and honestly, it's one of the creepiest things I've ever heard. We'll call her Minji. Minji is in her late 20s and works as an English tutor in China. A few years ago, she was helping one of her high school students prepare for exams. They ended up studying much later than expected, and by the time they finished, the buses had already stopped running for the night. The student lived pretty far away, so he asked if he could stay at her apartment and catch the first bus in the morning. At first, Minji wasn't comfortable with the idea. Having a teenage male student spend the night in her apartment seemed like a situation she'd rather avoid, but the boy kept pleading with her, and eventually she agreed. She lived in a small one-room apartment. When they got back, Minji went to sleep in her bed while the student spread out a blanket on the floor beside it. Before long, they both fell asleep. A few hours later, sometime around 2 in the morning, Minji was suddenly woken up. The student was standing over her. He said, "I'm starving. Let's go get something to eat." Minji stared at him.
Food? Right now?
She asked,
It's 2 in the morning. Go back to sleep.
but the student wouldn't let it go.
No, I'm really hungry. Let's go.
Minji pointed out that she had instant ramen in the apartment and told him he could make some for himself if he wanted. That wasn't good enough. He insisted there was a restaurant nearby that stayed open all night and kept trying to convince her to go with him. After several minutes of him refusing to give up, Minji finally agreed. They got dressed, left the apartment, and walked outside. The moment they reached the street, the student's entire attitude changed. He looked at Minji and quietly said,
I'm not actually hungry.
Confused, she asked what he meant. The boy took a deep breath and said,
I woke up during the night and looked under your bed.
Then he paused.
There's a man sleeping under there.
For a second, Minji thought he had to be joking, but he wasn't. The student explained that because he was sleeping on the floor, he had a clear view underneath the bed. When he woke up, he noticed someone lying there in the darkness, completely hidden from Minji's perspective. The reason he kept insisting they leave wasn't because he wanted food. He was trying to get her out of the apartment without alerting the stranger. Once they were safely outside, they called the police. When officers searched the apartment, they discovered that the man was homeless and had somehow been secretly living inside Minji's apartment. According to the investigation, he had apparently been sneaking in and sleeping under her bed for nearly 2 months. The only reason he was finally discovered was because the student happened to be sleeping on the floor and had the one angle in the room that allowed him to see underneath the bed.